I'd like to turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 12. This is an account that paints a beautiful picture of allegiance to King David. It, of course, serves as a picture of allegiance to one greater than David, Jesus Christ. The chapter is retrospective. It looks back on some events. Broadly speaking, is made up of two divisions. In verses 1 through 22, there are those who came to David when he was at Ziklag. The record of such is 1 Samuel chapters 27 through 30. Fleeing from Saul, there were 600 of his men, and he was there at Ziklag for 16 months. We read that in 1 Samuel 27 and verse 7. It was during his time in Ziklag that Saul and his 3 sons were killed in battle. We read that in 1 Samuel 31. But this portion of 1 Chronicles 12, verses 1 through 22, can actually be divided into 3 sections. Verses 1 through 7, one section, verse 8 through 18, another, and then verse 19 through 22. And they just simply records the various groups that came to David, showing their allegiance to him. And then in verses 23 through 38, there is the record of those who came to David when he was in Hebron, and they came to publicly anoint David as the king over the entire nation. So it's an account that moves from location to location, speaking of various individuals and groups who displayed allegiance to David. So the chapter is a record of those who came to David, pledging allegiance to him. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, we'll read verses 38 through verse 40. All these men of war that could keep rank came with a perfect heart to Hebron. Their purpose to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one heart to make David king. And there they were with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for the brethren had prepared for them. Moreover, they that were nigh them, even unto Issachar and Zebulun, Naphtali, brought bread on asses, and on camels, and on mules, and on oxen, and meat, meal, cakes of figs, bunches of raisins, and wine, and oil, and oxen, and sheep abundantly. For there was joy in Israel. Now, what is said there refers directly to the people coming to David in Hebron, but could also be said of those who came to him in Ziklag as well. It's simply a picture of a people who readily, with one heart, in one accord, without any confusion whatsoever, without any apology, they simply look to David, they point to David, and they say, he's our king. He's our king. In the record of 1 Chronicles 12, there's several characteristics mentioned of those who pledged their allegiance to David, whether it be Ziklag or Hebron. And we want to just take note of some of those characteristics. Again, they came from different tribes. They came from different backgrounds. They came from different circumstances. But they all had similar characteristics. So our subject is the characteristics of allegiance to Christ. These people stand with David, with their loyalty, with their support. So let's look at these characteristics. The first thing is that they came to David. They came to David. Notice verse 1. 1 Chronicles 12, verse 1. Now these that came to David. Verse 16. And there came of the children of Benjamin and Judah to the hold unto David. Cave Adullam. Verse 22. For at that time, day by day, there came to David. Verse 23, middle of the verse, came to David to Hebron. Verse 38, we read all these men of war that could keep rank came to David. We read in verse 23, and these are the numbers that came to David to Hebron. And then the numbers are given. And you're looking at about 340,000 people that came to David in Hebron. Verse 24, you have 6,800. Verse 25, you have 7,100. Verse 26, 4,600. Verse 27, 3,700. Verse 28, there's 22. Verse 29, there's 3,000. Verse 30, there's 20,800. Verse 31, 18,000. Verse 32, 200. Verse 33, 50,000. Verse 34, there's 1,037,000. So you have 1,000, you have 37,000. Verse 35, there's 28,600. Verse 36, there's 40,000. Verse 37, there's 120,000. This is no small gathering in Hebron, and they've all come to David. They came to David, and they left something, every one of them, and they came to David. And the reason is because they had a heart desire for David. They want to be where David is. Verse 39, and there they were with David. All these people with David. They were focused upon David. Again, they're from different tribes, different backgrounds, different circumstances. But they have this in common. They all came to David. And what tribe you were from really didn't matter. Where you came from really didn't matter. What your background was really didn't matter. They all come to David for one purpose. We see also they recognize, these are the characteristics, they came to David, 1. 2, they recognized and they acknowledged the authority of David. They came realizing, they came convinced that David had authorization from God to command, to control, to rule, and to influence the nation and their lives. They realized, they were convinced that David had jurisdiction in their life. And they come to acknowledge such. Again, this is no small gathering. Thirdly, They came to be helpers in the cause of David. Now we'll put Ziklag and Hebron together here. Notice verse 1. Came to David to Ziklag, and then you read on and you see they were mighty men, helpers of the war. Helpers of the war. Verse 17. Still Ziklag. David went out to meet them and answered and said unto them, If ye be come peaceably unto me, to help me. To help me. And then verse 22. For at that time, day by day, there came to David to help him. To help him. So they've come to be of help to David. So they have come identifying with the cause of David. This was the realization that there was something greater, more significant than themselves or their lives. There was something greater. And that was the cause of David. They came to help. That means that they came to be of service to David. To be of service to him. They came to contribute to the cause of David. We need to ask ourselves many times, do I contribute to the cause of Christ? Or do I take away from the cause of Christ? Do I contribute to the good of the church? Or do I take away? On and on we could go. But they came to contribute to the cause of David. That is, they came to be occupied with whatever David wanted them to be occupied with. You ever have someone say to you, I want to help you, and then they tell you how they're going to help, but what they tell you really isn't going to be a help at all. It's going to create more work for you. But they're doing it in the name of help. But if someone really, truly wants to help, perhaps the question they should ask is, how can I help? Because if it's not what I need, guess what? It's not help. Even if you call it help, it still isn't. So they came to help David. As I believe they came and said, David, whatever it is, we're here. We're here. Whatever it is, we're here to do service to you. We're here to be occupied with your cause. And they were willing to fill their lives with whatever was David's desire. That's what we want to do. They were there to be used of David. That's allegiance. Fourthly, they were ready. They were prepared. Notice verses 1 and 2 concerning Ziklag. Now these are they that came to David to Ziklag, while he yet kept himself close because of Saul the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men, helpers of the war. They were armed with bows. They were ready. They were prepared. And could use both the right hand and the left in hurling stones. They had skill. They had gifts. And shooting arrows out of a bow, even of Saul's brethren, of Benjamin. They came to David and they were ready. And they were prepared. And we ought to always be ready. We ought to keep ourselves in such a spiritual condition that we're always ready to be of help to the cause. Always prepared. Because we never know when we're going to be called upon. So we're ready. We're prepared. We need to keep ourselves in that state. So they were willing to do David's bidding. Not only willing, but they were cheerful, they were happy, they were glad, they were exuberant to just be of some use to David. And they made themselves available. Notice verse 23 and 24. These are the numbers of the bands that were ready armed. Notice, ready armed to the war, and came to David. And then verse 24, the children of Judah that bear shield and spear, they were ready. They were prepared. Just wanted to be of use to David. That should be our desire in life. Don't dictate to God what you will do. Just be ready and prepared to do what He bids. It's that simple. They were separated unto David. It's our fifth characteristic, verse 8. And of the Gentiles there separated themselves unto David, unto the hold in the wilderness. That's the cave in Adullam. We read of these Gadites that they separated themselves unto David. They set themselves apart. And this was unto David. They set themselves apart unto David. Who's it about? It's about David. They set themselves apart unto David. He was their desire. He was their reason. He was their purpose of being there. Everything is moving in the direction of David. It is unto David. David's the priority. David's the passion. Everything is moving toward David. They separated themselves unto David. That is, they set themselves apart with regard to David. They set themselves apart in respect of David. They set themselves apart in behalf of David. Everything is about David. They are absorbed with David. You take all of these people. Verse 8 is just talking about Ziklag, but take them all. What are they talking about? David. David. Everything is about David. Also notice verse 8. The sixth characteristic of the Gadites, there separated themselves unto David into the hold of the wilderness, men of might and men of war, fit for the battle. They were fit for the battle. They were very serious. This was a very serious matter. They were in a fit state. We must always be in a fit state to be of use to the Lord. They were in a fit state for what was at hand. They were in a state suitable to the cause at hand. All of this implies that they were serious. This wasn't a game. This wasn't just an activity. They were very serious. And they viewed the cause of David as something of the utmost importance, something that we must be fit for. They saw it as something very consequential, as something vital, as something very pressing. Seventhly, we see that there was surrender. Verse 18, they came and they said, Thine are we. Thine are we. They presented and they offered themselves to David. They handed themselves over to David. They gave up themselves. They let go of themselves. They relinquished possession and claim to their lives. And they say, Thine we are. We're here to do whatever it is that you want us to do. They yielded. They gave way. They submitted themselves to David to be governed by Him. They're there to comply with Him, to conform to Him. There was a denial of self. Did they have other things to do? Well, of course they did. Did they have other matters in their life? Of course they did. But they came to David and they put everything else away. And they said, Thine we are, or Thine are we. It was a surrender to the will and the government of David. They didn't just come to tell David what they would do. But David, we're yours, and whatever it is, we want to do it. We're ready to do it. We're happy to do it. They identified themselves with the side of David. Notice verse 18. Verse 18. The Spirit came upon Amasai, who was chief of the captains, and he said, Thine are we, David, and on thy side, thou son of Jesse. We're on your side. We're on your side. That implies more than one side. It implies opposition. Moses, Exodus 32, issued a call to the people during a time of great unbelief and departure from God, a time of great weakness, a time of idolatry, a time of apostasy, a time of when the trivial was the main thing, a time of forgetfulness and self-will, a time when they denied sin and saw no shame in sin. And Moses stood up in Exodus 32, verse 26, and said, Who then is on the Lord's side? Who's on the Lord's side? These people were clearly, visibly, and obviously on David's side. You didn't have to wonder. You didn't have to wonder whose side they were on. You knew. They're on David's side. That's how it ought to always be. Who's on the Lord's side? It ought to be clear. It ought to be obvious. We're on His side. We're on His side. There was also an open confession of faith. Verse 18. 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, God gives you the victory. They believed that. They believed that David was God's man. They were courageous. Verse 25. Mighty men of valor. Verse 28. Mighty of valor. They were courageous. That is, they had a daring about them. There was an audacity. There was a boldness. They were people of backbone for David. Again, it's all for David. Verse 33 and verse 38, they could keep rank. All of these people, they knew their place and could keep in their place. God has a place for each one of us. We ought to want to be in that place. Not to be in the place of someone else. Not to be in a place where God doesn't want us. But to be in place and we stay there. We keep rank. They had a position in the service of David. And they knew their position. They were thankful for their position. They felt honored and privileged to be in such a position. And they were willing to stay in their position unless David moved them to another position. And then they were willing to stay there. They had a single purpose. Verse 33 and 38, they were not of double heart. They had a singleness of heart, what Paul speaks of in Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3. That is, their purpose was one, to make David king. They had a singleness of purpose. So was this people, verse 38, who with a perfect, that simply means sincere, unmixed, undivided heart, to make David king. And then it's stated with one heart. Perfect heart, one heart. To make David king. That's why they were there. They were there to pledge their allegiance to David. There are many things in life that can call for our allegiance. But we had better make sure that our first allegiance is to God, is to the Lord. All these who came, whether Ziklag or Hebron, they rose above. They came out from the madness and the confusion of the times. And they came to David. And they said, David, you're our king. We acknowledge you as our king. They were willing to step out of the mess and step forward, stand up, say without any hesitation and with strong conviction, you are our king. And that's what we need to do. Jesus is the king. The Lord is king. Regardless of what anyone else does. It needs to be our intent, our aim, our purpose, our desire to serve Him as our King. What we need today is to be a people totally convinced, absolutely persuaded that God's choice of King, Jesus Christ, is our King. Need to be a people that is stirred in heart, filled with passion, zeal, boldness, courage, backbone, resolve, and steadfastness. That say, Jesus is the King of my life. And regardless of what anyone else does, it is my intent, it is my aim, it is my purpose, it is my desire to serve Him. We need husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, young people to stand up, to speak out, and say, I am serving Jesus. He is my King. Without any shame, without any hesitation. Need to be a people who can stay clean in a corrupt, depraved, and profaned society and culture. A people who have enough faith to declare and pledge allegiance to the Lord. A people who maintain godly conviction in the midst of instability. If you're a person of conviction, I promise you, there will be multitudes that will not agree. I'm talking about godly conviction. I'm not talking about opinions. I'm talking about godly conviction. Maintain godly conviction. A people who maintain a strict adherence in a society and culture that is saturated with heresy and blasphemy. A people who live boldly and courageously in a harassing society and culture. A people who live undeniably for God in a society of ambivalence. A people who maintain devotion and loyalty to God in the midst of a powerful enemy, in the midst of barriers, in the midst of difficulties and troubles and problems and hardships and trials. A people who live godly lives in a godless culture. People who live beaming lives in the darkness. A people who live God-penetrating lives. Lives that exceed mere religion. Lives that baffle Satan. Job was an individual that just absolutely baffled Satan. He was certain, if you take all of these things away, he'll curse you. But Job didn't. It just baffled Satan. And our lives should be such. What we need today is what we see in our text. A people with the attitude and spirit that simply says, no matter what happens, no matter what anyone else is doing, I am committed to Christ. That's what Joshua was saying. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Joshua was saying, you all do what you want. And you're going to do what you want, but as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And you're not going to make me feel bad about it. You're not going to make me feel guilty about it. We need a people that don't feel guilty about serving the Lord and standing for the Lord. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone else is doing. A people that says, it is my resolve, it is my purpose. I may fail, but it is my resolve, it is my purpose to be dedicated and surrendered to the one who saved my soul. And that's my purpose in life. And to put forth the utmost effort to give my all, to be occupied in the business of my King. The business of my King comes before all other business. This is allegiance to the Lord. A people that simply place themselves at the disposal of the King. These that came to David, they were aligned with him. They were attached to him. They were identified with him. We need to be aligned with Christ. All sorts of voices today calling us to be aligned. We need to be aligned with Christ. We need to be attached to him. Again, these are people of different tribes, different backgrounds, different circumstances. But they were aligned with David. They were attached to David. They were identified with David. They are saying, he is my priority. He's the object of my life. He's the passion of my life. I'm going to strive to please him. My life is clearly, visibly, and obviously for him. That needs to be our attitude. Oh, for each of God's people to be willing to stand up, to step out, and boldly declare, Jesus is my King. Jesus is my King. And we read in verse 39, and there they were with David. There they were with David. May that be us. There they were with Christ, living our life with Christ. Notice verse 40, for there was joy. There was joy in Israel. Again, joy is a byproduct. Happiness is a byproduct. It's a result. There was joy. Point to the Lord and let it be known. He's my King. He's my King. You do what you will, but he's my King. He's the one I live for. He's the one I'm going to follow. And you know what? That makes a joyful life. There's no better life. There's no better life than serving the Lord. I do not feel cheated in life serving God. I don't feel that I've missed a thing serving God. You don't miss out serving the Lord. Don't raise your children to think they're missing out because there's a seriousness about God. You don't miss anything worth missing. There's joy. There's joy in serving the Lord. Oh, that we would pledge our allegiance to God, that He would be first. Brother Dave, if you come and lead us in a verse of song, we'll all